With Grant Snider. So I'm really excited that you were able to carve out some time to hang out and to have this conversation. So thanks so much for being on the show today. I feel like a lot of people are going to be excited to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dr. Mitnaul.
Thanks. Grant, I was hoping that maybe you could start with maybe telling the audience and describing for me some of your a little bit about yourself and how life took you on this journey to be an author, illustrator, and orthodontist on the side.
Yeah, so ever since I was a kid, growing up here in just outside of Wichita, Kansas, and Derby, I love to draw. I love to write stories. I have a twin brother named Gavin, and we were always very competitive in a lot of things. Drawing and storytelling was one of them. So we kind of built off stories with each other. Always were trying to draw a little bit better than the other person. And I knew even after I went into school to become a dentist and eventually an orthodontist, I wanted drawing and writing stories to be a part of my life. I didn't really settle on what that would be until college, where I started drawing cartoons for the student newspaper.
Yeah.
At the University of Kansas. Eventually, I turned that into doing a weekly comic strip called Incidental Comics I was putting online, which I still do to this day.
Awesome.
And then a little bit later on, discovered children's books around the same time that my wife and I had our first daughter, Anna. And that's been another fun path, another way to get my creative thoughts and ideas out into the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so many of us grow up with some sibling rivalry, but it's very rare that you can say, I won definitively.
I don't know if I did, though, because he's still very creative. He's an architect.
Really? Okay.
He has a large Instagram following. He draws buildings in New York City where he lives. And,
oh, wow.
So we're still competitive in that regard.
That's awesome. Well, most of us start, elementary school years drawing, whether we want to or not. So was there a moment in that where you felt like this would be something really cool, or maybe where you got some feedback from someone who said, hey, Grant, there's something beautiful going on here. You should really stay with this.
Well, my parents were always really supportive of it, and almost to the point of, they made us draw birthday cards and Christmas cards and all kinds of cards for extended family members, which I really didn't like as much at the time, but now I see what they were trying to do,
Sure.
giving us projects and stuff. I had some good art teachers growing up. A teacher at Mulvane High School named Rich Canfield, and he was an interesting guy. He probably was about 6'6" or 6'7", maybe not quite that tall, but he isn't in my memory.
Okay.
And he never gave us clear feedback. It was always, he asked questions about our work. He tried to make us think about it. He was never like, oh, that's really good drawing.
Yeah. He
would always ask you a question that made you think, how could I have done this differently? And that was really inspiring to see that side of things.
That's awesome. And then you're on this, journey to being, an orthodontist. And so, the school and residency often are really busy times. So how did you save time or carve out time, or did this art thing kind of continue while you're getting all this great education?
I was probably always the person at the back of class doodling.
Okay. So that's not a bad thing for parents and educators watching. It's okay, Grant said.
Yeah. And sometimes that was, taking notes in the form of visuals, and sometimes it was a random thought that flew through my head. I always tried to carve out a little bit of time for my creative work, even if I was studying for a big test or a board exam or something like that. So I would spend Saturdays when I was in dental school with a pot of coffee, with my pencil and paper, my thoughts.
Okay.
And it was important that I found that time away from my normal routine and work to put in that creative effort. Otherwise, I might not have kept doing it.
Okay, yeah. And what would those times be like for you? So was it kind of a welcomed reprieve, or did it feel like, work? Or, what was that?
A little bit of both. I think for the most part, it was a very welcome reprieve because studying the minute details of teeth all day, it was nice to draw kind of a goofy drawing and make some jokes and and have fun in that regard. But other times, since I was drawing for a local newspaper, it was like, oh man, I have to do this, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. But as long as I sat down and put in that effort, something would come out. Sometimes it was better than others, but
for
the most part, it was always worthwhile to have that time and that kind of imposed deadline upon me to do it.
Yeah, and so you were already publishing even during training, is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's really neat. I think that's probably rare that people have like a burgeoning second career while they're doing some really great work on their primary thing.
At the time, I would call it more of a very time-consuming hobby than a career. I never saw it as that,
Okay.
but it was still something that
Yeah.
let me utilize my creative spirit in a different way than
Sure.
teeth and things did.
Yeah, and I imagine that being a creative person, so often in my clinical work, I'm seeing young people and talking about the most important things of their lives, and sometimes they're surprised when I mention what are some of the creative outlets that that you have either given yourself over to, or that maybe you picked up but have put down because whatever, life got busy or whatever. And I think this COVID, this last year of having more alone time, really, I think maybe pushed people in that direction, maybe a little bit more than typical. So I guess, how do you see kind of creativity in the realm of helping young people, or maybe helping a young Grant to express, I don't know, just your inner life or emotions, or yeah.
So I was always a pretty quiet kid. So
Okay.
I think it was a little bit a way of being on stage. Not that it's exactly the same as going out in front of a crowd, but when you write a story or do a drawing and you show it to people, you can maybe show a little bit different part of yourself than you otherwise would, and you're a little bit able to hide behind the work, but still say something pretty meaningful. And I kind of use that to this day. So maybe I'm thinking about something that I'm not quite ready to know how to fully express it, but if I take that and I put it down on paper into a form of a book or a comic or something like that, I'm able to clarify those thoughts and then eventually share them with people, strangers, friends, family, whoever.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty cool thing, I think.
That is really cool. I like how you mentioned kind of clarifying a thought, because I was thinking about this before we sat down, that often in therapy with young people, we're often hearing kind of the story of their lives, and then sometimes twisting it around or reordering the parts, or maybe taking a slightly different perspective on it. And in some ways, it feels like I would imagine that storytellers kind of do that too, that they take things that seem predictable and ordinary and make it really fascinating, or change the perspective in a way that brings people in. Is that part of your process? Is that kind of
That's a really good way of putting it, I think, because if you pick up a book off the shelf and flip through it, maybe it's a fantasy novel or something, you may not at first glance see the author's inner thoughts and feelings in there, but they're there somewhere, I promise. The way it works for when I work on something is I kind of start with a sketchbook. So day to day, small moments, I can kind of jot down ideas, or maybe I see an interesting thing to draw, put these things in my sketchbook, come back to them later when I'm sitting down to make a piece of work that it might be published, and I can kind of connect those ideas and put them together. And when it comes out, you may not know that it was taken from this walk I took over my lunch break or something, but I can see those connections and bring them to make something that was different and unexpected.
Sure. And I imagine that you get feedback too from educators, from teachers that say, hey, thanks for framing this in a really neat way, or helping my child's imagination maybe in appreciating something. Have there been, some of those things that have really stood out to you or really touched you in a way that maybe you didn't expect, or maybe it affected them in ways that, you didn't maybe anticipate the work meaning that for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so cool when teachers share like a drawing I've done on Twitter, and they share it to their classes, I think what they call a mentor text.
Okay.
So basically they're using it as an example of a piece of writing or a piece of work that their class can then build off of. So they do almost their own version of that comic strip. And they've sent me some pretty awesome examples where they took like a comic I'd posted online, and the kids in the class did their own versions of it. And I was like, man, that's so cool to see.
It's really cool.
I didn't think it could be translated, to anybody but myself, my own thoughts, but you get to see other people's perspective on your own artwork, and that's really neat.
Yeah, that is really cool. I hadn't really thought about that, and that's neat how how educators are using that, using your art to help encourage the artistic, endeavors of the young people too, that they're helping to kind of shape and form and teach. When reading, I think the first book that I read with my kids all together of yours is What Color is Night?
Yeah.
And I just thought, okay, nighttime is a time that can feel totally blank and absent. Sometimes like the sea, where you just assume, there's kind of nothing going on. And I felt like your exploration of nighttime gave it so much life and energy. And then my kids started, kind of listening for owl sounds, and and I think maybe afterwards we just took a second to look at the moon too, and just kind of appreciate some of the colors in the night sky. So I guess how did you get to that book, and what kind of inspired you there?
That's really cool because I mean, just stories like that make it make it worth making books. The idea for that story came in a couple ways. One was my son Trent. And he was probably 4 or 5 at the time.
Okay.
Long past his bedtime. I see him looking out his window.
Yeah.
I go up to his room about to get mad and tell him to go back to bed. But he looked at me and asked really sincerely, Dad, I wanted to see what color night was, or what color is night? And I'm like, man, I'm kind of upset at you, Trent, but that's a great idea for a story. So that was one of the original inspirations for the book. The other part of it was I'd been trying for a long time to do a kid's picture book.
Okay.
Because it's a form I've loved to read, since I was 4 or 5 myself. Sure. But didn't quite know how to do it. I'd gone to like an artist retreat in the mountains in New York where it was snowy and lonely and way outside my daily existence.
Yeah.
And trying to force this perfect book to arrive, and it didn't.
Okay.
But maybe the month I got back to Kansas and was doing my normal nighttime walk around the neighborhood, that book just came to me back in a flood. And Trent's thought that I'd put in my sketchbook, plus maybe the frustration of trying to force something that wasn't happening, coalesced to make that book.
That's amazing. I'm wondering too, for people, educators, parents who might be watching, or maybe even some young people too, who maybe have some burgeoning kind of creative talent that they're hoping to encourage or enliven in their child's life, because they see it as not only something just good for them or a fun way to spend some time, but also something that could really be meaningful to their sense of confidence or themselves or their whole mental wellness. So it's kind of a big question, but do you have any like tips or thoughts for the adults in those young people's lives and ways they might be able to encourage or fan the flames of that desire to do something, creative, or to share their gifts?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot with my own kids as well. And one thing I think is just making the supplies and making things available. So having a stack of art paper you put in a corner of one room, and some markers and colored pencils, and maybe you have some time where you sit on the floor and draw together. A box of sidewalk chalk they can get down and scribble all over the driveway and on the trees and everything else on the house. My kids do that at least.
Yes, we've had some of that too.
And just kind of freely create. One thing I did recently is my kids have always seen me carrying around my sketchbooks, which are, they're not the nicest ones out there, but they're a pretty decent artist sketchbook, and they always really wanted one of their own. So at first I was like, man, they're just gonna, do some little drawings in there and scribble it, and maybe it'll get thrown away,
Sure.
But I decided it was time to give them each a sketchbook of their own, and they filled it with great stuff, and it was amazing.
That's beautiful.
So I think just making the time and the materials and the space available, and maybe asking questions about their work, like that one teacher did with mine, and making them think about it in a little bit different ways.
Sure. Grant, thank you so much. I mean, I that's really a very kind of rich way of thinking about how to be maybe intentional about encouraging kind of our children's gifts. And so I know that's going to be helpful for a lot of families that watch this show. So again, I appreciate you taking out time. If people haven't encountered your comics, I strongly urge them to do so at Incidental Comics. And also your books are just really fantastic. And I'm biased because, we just really enjoyed it. And my kids, if they give it 2 thumbs up, then it's for real. It's legit.
Thanks so much.
Anyway, thanks so much, Grant. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.